Now, let the hunt begin!
So some of y'all might have some questions, like, who the hell is this guy? I'll tell you, but we have to start from the very beginning, and by that I mean The Matrix. Trust me. Directed by Lana and Lily Wachowski, The Matrix was an absolutely huge sci-fi film released in 1999 to rave reviews and huge box office returns. Upon its success, The Matrix as a franchise was born, and that's not just the 2 sequels that were quickly put into production. We got video games, comics, anime, CGI shorts, the works. These weren't incidental spin-offs that didn't matter either. While these extra productions beyond the core film trilogy weren't necessary, all of them were canon and tied into the direct story of the movies. Want to know about the events that lead into the second film, The Matrix Reloaded? Watch the first segment of the Animatrix, The Final Flight of the Osiris. Want to know what's happening parallel to Reloaded events and follow supporting characters Niobe and Ghost? Well, Enter the Matrix, the video game, was for you. Heck, it had over 1 hour of brand new live-action sequences included in the game, directed and written by the Wachowskis too. There was even an online MMO, The Matrix Online, that continued the Matrix's story past the then final film, The Matrix Revolutions. Basically, it's all connected, and this is commonly referred to as transmedia storytelling, an interconnected story told across different mediums. In the Matrix case, that meant movies, games, comics, shorts, anime. You get it. Transmedia storytelling became a very common use for marketing as well, especially in the digital age. With every entry in a story, it teased you with another product. For instance, The Final Flight of the Osiris features events that lead directly into the Matrix. Want the whole story, fellow nerds? Buy all of the things. You don't want to be left out and not know how A thing connects to B thing, huh? Do ya? You can see why this method of storytelling can seem like a win-win situation. Expansion of a popular franchise with an extremely dedicated fan base? Check. Branching out into innovative technology with said expansions? Check. Okay, now what am I forgetting? Oh yeah, money. Entertainment's a business, what can I say? Because of the Matrix success with transmedia storytelling, plenty of other production companies took serious note. Probably the most obvious example involves the various viral marketing campaigns movies in the late 2000s used, like Cloverfield and The Dark Knight, from various cryptic websites to full-on scavenger hunts in major cities, all tied together to give more context to the story to be told in their respective movies. It was extremely effective from a marketing standpoint. Again, a win-win. There's money to be made, and it ends up, most of the time, a positive experience for the companies and the fans. And before we move on to the main attraction, let's be clear in that transmedia storytelling, it has to involve multiple kinds of media like games, movies, shorts, books. Kingdom Hearts and its originally exclusive releases across a crap ton of platforms is not transmedia storytelling. The official definition for that is mess. So in 2003, a newly married Squaresoft and Enix, now Square-Enix, aren't they so adorable together, announced Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, a brand new story taking place after the events of the 1997 PlayStation 1 game Final Fantasy VII, told in the form of a feature-length CGI film, and thus began the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, a new transmedia franchise to expand upon the original game. Compilation was ambitious to say the least, consisting of a movie, games, books, an OVA. Like, you know what? Let's just do a quick overview of everything this entailed. Due to delays with Advent Children, the first product to arrive in the compilation was Before Crisis, Final Fantasy VII in 2004, an RPG specifically developed for cell phones. It was a prequel set 6 years prior to Final Fantasy VII and never received a release outside of Japan. After that, finally came Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, the aforementioned feature-length CGI film in 2005, released direct-to-video on DVD and PSP UMD. Oh, I miss these things. So impractical, but still. Along with receiving some limited theatrical screenings too. It'll be followed by an expanded director's cut, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children Complete, in 2009, also released direct-to-video, this time exclusively on high-definition Blu-ray. Also in 2005, we saw the release of the anime OVA, that's original video animation, Last Order Final Fantasy VII. Running just over 20 minutes, Last Order also served as a prequel recapping events mostly involving Soldier member Zack Fair. In 2006, we jumped back into the video game space with Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, a third-person shooter of all things starring supporting character Vincent Valentine in a story elaborating on his character along with taking place after Advent Children as well. The last major entry of the compilation was also a video game, this time for the PlayStation Portable, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, an action RPG that fully covered the story of Zack Fair before the events of 7 proper. Beyond these core products, there were also various tie-ins like On a Way to Smile, a collection of short stories. One story about Denzel, a character from Advent Children, was also adapted into an anime short that was included as a bonus feature on the complete edition of Advent Children. There was a second novel too following the Turks known as Final Fantasy VII Lateral Biography Turks. The kids are alright. In conclusion, the compilation had lots of stuff. Now, Tetsuya Nomura has said the recent 7 remake is in fact part of the compilation. But we're going to talk about the series in its original incarnation up to 2009. Really, Remake is its own thing, like at this point its own sub-series, and we don't have the time. So this was the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, an incredibly ambitious plan for Square-Enix at the time to expand on the world and characters from the PlayStation 1 game. Now here's a blanket spoiler warning for everything to do with the original game and the entries in the compilation. We can't discuss it without a lot being spoiled, say for, you know, the new stuff in the remake. So if you've only played the remake, get out now. You've seen enough. So here's a fun fact. The compilation, specifically Advent Children, was my first Final Fantasy thing ever. As so many young 90s kids, Kingdom Hearts was my gateway back in 2002 to becoming interested in Final Fantasy in general. So when I saw the DVD at Blockbuster with my favorite edgy boy on the cover and wondering where his cape and wing went, well, I rented it. And yeah, this doesn't make much sense if you haven't played the original Final Fantasy VII. Big surprise, remember when I said transmedia storytelling was all about interconnected, vital storytelling across multiple platforms? See, spending a few minutes talking about the Matrix was worth it, right? If you've made it this far, please like, comment, and subscribe and ring that notification. I wouldn't say these extra stories the compilation covers is required. Not at all. But if you played and enjoyed Final Fantasy VII on the original PlayStation and or every system it's now been ported to,
17 long years ago. I'm happy to...
yeah, Square, we remember. The compilation is just full of bountiful riches in some bad spots, but you know what? That's okay. So this whole extension of the Seven universe was in fact spearheaded by Yoshinori Kitase, the original director of Final Fantasy VII. Tetsuya Nomura too had a big hand in the overall series as well, contributing immense amounts of design work to every entry in the compilation, along with directing Advent Children himself after the success Square had with CGI shorts, specifically the secret ending of the original Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, I dream of a full CGI Kingdom Hearts movie like Advent Children. Just dreaming. No matter what people may think of the individual entries, the compilation was really quite successful from a storytelling standpoint. Final Fantasy VII crafted a rich universe in Midgar and its surrounding lands and rich cast of characters, and while it could be argued that the compilation project could have been effectively deployed on other major Final Fantasy games with rich worlds like, say, Final Fantasy X, for instance, it's hard to argue the immense impact VII's story and characters had on the video game industry upon its 1997 release. It seemed only right to choose it as a focal point to spring off into an expanded transmedia universe. In excessively quick summary, let's roll through what exactly was expanded upon real fast. Before Crisis gives more context to the organization known as the Turks and the relationship with Shinra prior to 7, while Crisis Core also serves as a prequel chronicling the story of Zack Fair and his relationships to Soldier, Aerith, even Cloud, and Sephiroth. No, you're crying, I'm fine. Fine. Last Order further elaborates on events that occur in Crisis Core. Now, at this point in the compilation, we jump to post-Final Fantasy VII with Advent Children, as remnants of Sephiroth work to bring him back to life as Cloud deals with his guilt with the loss of people he cares about. I'm still trying to avoid spoilers, I warned you, I can only be so vague. This leads to a truly final, we assume, confrontation with a reborn Sephiroth. Mario is f***ing murdered, hope everyone had a good Mario day, and Cloud finally begins to forgive himself and returns to his friends. Also, Denzel, the aforementioned new kid character, says this.
Son of a bitch!
I was 11 when I first saw this, and I thought this was quite inappropriate. It was PG-13, I don't know why I found it so scandalous. Finally, in the timeline, we get to Dirge of Cerberus, which details events that involve side character
Vincent Valentine,
dealing with his history with the always delightful Hojo and Lucrezia. Further clarifying his past along with Sephiroth's, there's also this organization called Deep Ground, Weiss, leading to a super fun reunion team-up of everyone. It's fun. And that's the compilation, shockingly straightforward when you look at it in a broad sense. If you dive into specifics, the question then becomes, how effective was it at broadening the Seven universe in an interesting, dynamic way? Was it a success? Subjective and objective here, and for those who don't know, me being one of them, as my Google's used to me typing subjective versus objective in the search bar, subjective is based on opinion, while objective is fact-based. So, subjectively, I'd argue yes, it was a success. Even just one of these entries proving essential to me, story-wise, would make the whole enterprise worth it in the end. For me, that's Crisis Core. Zack is a great character that you learn about in the original 7, but he emerges as more of a mythic, legendary figure in the way he's brought up and discussed. Crisis Core serves as a way to humanize him more and really allow the player to really get to know him. It's really good stuff and the kind of storytelling expansion I'm always here for. The rest are still good, though I think I'd weigh Advent Children as just worth it for the exceptionally cool action scenes alone. This was the first time these characters had been rendered in such detail as were coming from the chunky polygons of the PlayStation era, and that technological advancement was the big hook. The story is absolutely silly, but it's really an excuse to get to a final showdown between Cloud and Sephiroth, which, you know, worth it. The rest, take them or leave them. Last Order is just further elaboration on events chronicled in other entries, though seeing characters in the traditional 2D anime style is cool. I consider Before Crisis also an essential, but it's fun for fans of the Turks. And then there's Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII. If you haven't seen my full video on the game specifically, check it out after this. Yes, this game is a mess, it isn't very good, but yes, I love it. And I will not be ashamed anymore. Basically, Dirge boils down to Square experimenting with making an action third-person shooter game. And they weren't very successful, but again, I still love it, and it's all nonsense. In all these quote-unquote lesser entries though, anything I think can be found worthwhile. From new characters, new music, Gact fans get thrown quite a few bones. There's something for everyone. Everyone. So now, objectively, was the compilation a success? Well, also, yes, sales were strong for all entries, from Advent Children selling a hell of a lot when it was released on DVD and UMD. Heck, the Blu-ray version of Advent Children was a cited reason for increased sales of PlayStation 3 consoles with their Blu-ray disc playback. Other titles like Dirge sold less compared to Advent Children and Crisis Core, the most popular of the bunch, but none were a failure. In fact, Dirge was the only title in the compilation with more of a mixed reception. Not surprising, might I add, but when an experiment in genre twisting for Final Fantasy is the lower scored, and again, not outright negative, that's not too shabby. So by pretty much all accounts, there was really nothing to complain about. The compilation was a risk for sure, but hey, they pulled it off. It operated as a great way to kind of provide some fan service for 7 fans and get to see more of the characters and locales they loved. And you know, the compilation was my direct introduction to Final Fantasy. I'm a compilation baby? No, that's weird. If you want to split hairs, the original Kingdom Hearts was really my true intro into Final Fantasy, and who's that cool character? Who's that cool character? Who's that cool character? And why do they sound like Kim Possible?
I'm the great Ninja Yuffie.
But really my first ever experience with a pure Final Fantasy title was with Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Young kid, me renting it at a Blockbuster and just falling in love. Again, obviously it didn't make much sense because I didn't have the original context of the game, but this was my actual entry point for these characters in the world that led me to finally playing the original once it was released on the PS3 as a PS1 classic. So it's kind of funny that for me, and I'm sure a bunch of other young fans at the time, that the compilation kind of worked backwards, where its surface level mission was to give old fans more of what they loved, but in turn, it served as an entry point for new fans to rediscover a classic. In the end, what else can be said? The compilation just worked. It kept Final Fantasy VII in the cultural conversation, and when that PS3 tech demo hit recreating the intro to the game, I mean, I don't think I need to tell you that the fan outcry for a full remake of the game was successful. Damn, I still think about that troll at the PlayStation experience in 2014. Look at the like-dislike ratio for the trailer for the 7 port to PS4 on YouTube sometime. It's hilarious. When it was released, the compilation felt truly one of a kind. Yes, transmedia storytelling like this had been done before, but not for a video game and not at this scale, especially when you include the actual 7 remake in the compilation. That game wouldn't exist if not for the fans' love for the series that pressed on through these releases. I think there's a world where if the compilation didn't exist, we wouldn't have the remake today. All speculation, of course, but I mean, it's not like it didn't help at the very least. Now, this is the part where I say, now go buy them, go buy all the compilation titles, but it's not easy. Crisis Core is locked on the PSP, Dirge on the PS2. Before Crisis didn't release outside of Japan, it's tough. But thankfully there's always YouTube videos and summaries, but also with the release of Remake, we're also getting concepts from the compilation directly integrated into the Remake project, which I am so here for. And beyond that, we'll be getting the recently announced Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, which will be an episodic retelling of the original game along with all of the compilation titles on a mobile platform, and I'm sure it'll follow on consoles when complete, a la the 15 Pocket Edition. So all is not lost. Another big thing is that the compilation led Square to, you know, surprise, try it again? Sorta? Remember the Fabula Nova Chrysalis Final Fantasy sub-series? No? Well, it included the 13 Trilogy, Final Fantasy Type 0, Final Fantasy Agito, and Final Fantasy 15. Yep, no, seriously, this was technically a sub-series. The idea was to share a similar mythology across various titles, and it kinda worked, I guess. Definitely not as successful as the 7 compilation, and I'd even argue that it isn't really an example of transmedia storytelling, as it's all thematic in its connection instead of one big universe, but inspired by it at the least, so it's cool to see Square attempting big scope projects across multiple titles like this still. So that's the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Now again, the remake project now happening is technically part of it, but that's a whole other thing we can talk about in another video someday. This meta series holds a special place in my heart, and I hope this encourages you to check out these other entries in the 7 universe in some form if you're a new or old fan. They're worth your time and you might find a new favorite, who knows. It was quite the bold experiment for the then newly formed Square-Enix, and I sincerely hope we see ambitious storytelling across various mediums in the video game space like this more often. Go big or go home, I would say. I mean, since we're getting Weiss and 7 Remake with this June's Intergrade release, where's Gact, Square? I need to see Gact's face in 4K with the power of the PlayStation 5. I mean, haptic feedback for the singing. Thanks everyone for watching. I've been itching to kind of make a nice overview for a while on the compilation, so I really hope you enjoyed it. Also, big shoutouts to Very Finny and Chili Farmer, whose Weiss reactions were featured at the top of the video. If you'd like to give them a follow, you can check the description below. And you know, you should follow them. They're great. Now you can find me on Twitch and Twitter if you want to stay updated on what's happening on the channel, along with watching me stream games like Final Fantasy 5 days a week. And I'm officially a trendy boy, and I'm on TikTok too now, so there's that. Don't hurt me, Gen Z. Anyway, that's all from me, and I'll see you next time. I joke, but like, comment, and subscribe. It blesses the algorithm, and I hear that's real important.